I stood there, frozen. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming clarity that hit me all at once. On the other side of the doorway, someone was waiting. Calm. Still. He leaned casually against the frame, like he'd been there forever. Our eyes met. Then he asked, "Do you want to come home?" But it wasn't just a question. It was everything. In that moment I understood, without words, what home really meant. Not a place, not a building. A return to something pure, whole, and eternal. I knew exactly what that doorway was. I knew who was asking. And somehow, I knew exactly what crossing that threshold would mean. That kind of clarity doesn't happen in everyday life. But there, in that space beyond the ordinary, it was like truth itself stood wide open. Hi, I'm Kellen Flukiger. I'm here to share what happened to me. An experience that shattered what I thought I knew about life, death, and everything in between. This isn't just a story. It's a wake-up call, a reminder that there's far more to our journey than we can see. Now let me take you back. For 30 years, I had what most people would call a successful career. From 1977 to 2007, I climbed the ranks in the energy industry, holding major roles across the US and Canada. On paper, I had made it. Titles, income, recognition, it was all there. But behind that polished surface, my life was unraveling. I went through multiple failed relationships. I struggled with addiction. At one point, I was spending $3,000 a week on cocaine, living what some might call a double life. I was a single dad with 4 of my 10 kids living under my roof, trying to hold it all together while quietly falling apart. I was what you'd call a high-functioning disaster. I had the house, the car, the image, but inside, I was barely hanging on. That's where my real journey began, not with success, but with the decision to face the truth and rebuild from the inside out. It was August 2007, a Friday evening, and I'd just gotten home from work. At that point in my life, I was juggling a lot. 4 of my teenage kids were living with me, while the rest were either grown or living with one of my ex-wives. Yeah, plural. Not exactly a resume for personal stability. From the outside, I was still playing the part. Successful career, big house, all the trappings. But on the inside, I was numb, exhausted, and quietly sinking. That night, I had every intention of disappearing into another wild weekend, partying hard to escape the chaos I didn't want to face. But then something strange happened. I felt this sudden irrational pull to turn on the TV. Sounds like nothing, right? But here's the thing, I never watched TV. I had a huge one, sure, mostly for the kids, but I never touched it. In fact, I didn't even know how to use the remote. So I asked my 16-year-old daughter for help. She rolled her eyes, hit a few buttons, tossed the remote at me, and walked off. The screen lit up and landed on a show called Intervention. I'd never seen it before. Maybe you haven't either. It was a raw, intense show where families confronted loved ones with serious addictions, hoping to get them help. I watched for 10 minutes, just enough to see the episode was about a high-level executive with a cocaine addiction. I was watching a mirror of my own life, and I hated it. I scoffed, turned it off, and tried to shake it off. But something inside me was stirred, deep, restless. I couldn't ignore it. A little while later, as I was about to head out the door, I felt this overwhelming push, like something outside myself was urging me to turn the TV back on. So I did. Same show, same episode, starting over. No DVR, no rerun listed. It shouldn't have been possible, but it was happening right in front of me. This time I watched the whole thing. The man on the screen, he denied everything, yelled at his family, stormed out. It didn't end well. But what hit me hardest wasn't just his meltdown, it was the heartbreak on his family's faces. That haunted me. Instead of going out, I stood in the living room in silence. Something cracked open inside me. I wasn't okay. And for the first time in a long time, I knew it. I didn't go out that night. I didn't pour another drink or call anyone. I went to bed. Not because I was tired, but because I needed to stop, to think. That night, something began to change. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment my story started to turn around. When I went to bed that night, I thought I was just trying to escape. But instead of sleep, I stepped into something I can only describe as hell. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt real, more real than anything I'd ever experienced. I found myself in a dark, theater-like space, completely out of my body. In front of me was a stage, and what played out on that stage wasn't fiction. It was my life. Scene by scene, moment by moment, I watched the pain, both the pain I had endured and the pain I had caused. It started in childhood. I saw myself as a young boy, living through years of physical abuse that no one ever talked about. The kind of pain that doesn't just hurt your body, it rewires your soul. And I realized, right then, that I had carried that trauma with me my entire life. I had buried it, ignored it, masked it with drugs, ego, and distraction. But it never left. It just sat beneath the surface, shaping everything. Then the scenes shifted. Years of addiction, the people I'd lied to, the relationships I'd destroyed, the trust I'd broken. There was no hiding, no editing, no skipping forward. I had to feel it all, and the emotional pain. It was unbearable. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Just when I thought I couldn't take another second, I heard a voice, clear, calm, and powerful, from somewhere behind me. It simply said, "It is enough." And just like that, it ended. I jolted awake, completely disoriented. First, I noticed I was twisted around in bed, like I'd been thrown there. Second, the sheets were soaked, drenched in sweat, like I'd been fighting for my life. You could have wrung them out. But the part that truly rattled me, the sun was pouring in through my bedroom window. My windows face west. That shouldn't have been possible, not unless something unexplainable had just happened. And deep down, I knew it had. That night changed everything. I hadn't just remembered my pain, I'd faced it. I hadn't just seen my mistakes, I had felt their weight. And through all that darkness, something else had quietly entered. A chance. A chance to stop running. A chance to rebuild. A chance to finally become the man I was meant to be, not the one I had pretended to be. That moment was the beginning of something new, a different path. One that didn't come easy, but one that finally felt real. When I finally opened my eyes, the clock read 5 p.m. Saturday. I'd been gone, wherever that place was, for 18 hours. I sat on the edge of my bed, drenched in sweat, disoriented and stunned. But one thing was crystal clear. I'd been given an invitation, not a demand, not a punishment. An invitation to change, to become someone new, someone better. The weight of that hit me hard. I didn't know what step to take next. I had no roadmap. I'd never asked for help before. I had no mentors, no support system. My family had written me off years ago. Sure, I had my kids, but emotionally, I was isolated. Still, that moment carved one truth deep into my soul. I was done with the life I'd been living. That very day, I got up, gathered what was left of my drug stash, about $1,000 worth, and threw it all away. Cold, no drama, just a decision. A decision to start over. From 2007 to 2018, those next 11 years became a journey of rebuilding. The first few years I leaned hard into therapy, rehab, and real healing. Something I'd never dared to touch before. Then something began to shift. As I peeled away the layers of shame, anger, and trauma, a new hunger grew inside me. Not for success, not for redemption, but to serve. I started writing books about the journey, the pain, the lessons. Not as an expert, but as someone who'd walked through the fire. Today, I've written 20 books, and I'm working on number 21. I built a global coaching practice from scratch, helping people find their voice, their worth, and their way forward. I didn't set out to be a coach. I followed a calling that wouldn't let go. And here's what I've learned. The experience didn't do the work for me. It wasn't a magic fix. It was a wake-up call. A piercing moment that shook me enough to finally choose change. The rest? That was on me. The sweat, the tears, the breakthroughs, the rebuilding. All of it was earned, one day at a time. Then, in 2018, after over a decade of growth, something even more unexpected happened. I met someone whose name quite literally was joy. You can't make this stuff up. It was like life was winking at me, saying, "See? This is what happens when you say yes to the invitation. From rock bottom to purpose, from isolation to connection. None of it was easy. But every step was worth it. And it all started with one choice. I'm done with that life. I'm ready for something more." In 2018, after years of rebuilding my life, Joy and I decided to do something new together. Take our first cruise. We'd never done anything like that before, and it felt like a celebration, a marker of how far we'd come. But what started as a dream getaway ended very differently. On the flight home, I started feeling off, just a little sick at first. By the time we landed back in North America, I was burning up. I brushed it off. Just the flu, I told myself. No big deal. But by Friday, I'd been in bed for 5 straight days, and it was getting scary. The fever wouldn't break. My body felt like it was shutting down. I finally dragged myself to a walk-in clinic. I didn't even make it past the front door. The nurse took one look at me and said, "You need to get to the ER right now. We can't help you here." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a bad flu. At the ER, things moved fast. Too fast. 1 minute, I was answering routine questions. The next, they were rushing me into a private room. No waiting, no delay. That kind of urgency in a hospital is never a good sign. Within minutes, a doctor came in and said, "We're admitting you, but we're not sure what's going on yet." I told Joy to head home and take care of the pets, promising her I'd call once they figured things out. But within hours, everything escalated. Doctors returned and told me I was being transferred to the ICU. And not just any room. They were placing me in biological isolation. They explained it like something out of a movie. Full hazmat suits, sealed double doors, no contact with the outside. I half joked, "What am I, from Mars?" But inside, I was terrified. Then the doctor came back with a question I'll never forget. "Do we have your permission to intubate you if necessary? To do anything we need to preserve your life?" I just stared at him. What? I wasn't ready to hear that. I wasn't ready to die. After he left, I turned inward. I'd practiced meditation for years, and in that moment I closed my eyes, and slipped into stillness. But what I felt next wasn't peace. It was strange, almost surreal. I felt a sensation like a zipper running from the top of my head to my toes. It was as if my spirit and body were slowly separating. Right then, I knew. This wasn't just about getting better. I was dying. Something deep inside told me this was bigger than illness. This was the edge of life itself. But what happened next? That's where the real story begins. That night, after a full day of spiraling deeper into illness, I hit a wall. It was around midnight. My body was shaking uncontrollably. I could barely hold my phone, let alone type. But I knew I had to try. My hands were trembling so badly I could hardly press the buttons. But somehow I managed to send a text to Joy. 3 lines. I see you. Isolation/intubation. I may be dying. She never saw it. She was asleep. But around 2:30 in the morning her phone rang. It was the hospital, the kind of call no one ever wants to get. "Are you coming?" they asked. That's when she saw my message. That's when it hit her. This wasn't just serious. It was life or death. Somewhere around that time, I flatlined. My heart stopped. I coded. I died. I don't remember the crash, the chaos, or the machines. For the next 17 days, I was in a coma. But what I do remember is what happened when I left my body. Suddenly, I was awake. Not in a hospital bed, but somewhere else entirely. I sat up, and the room was different. I wasn't surrounded by wires or machines. Instead, everything around me was a muted grey, like I'd stepped into a fog. There were no clear walls, no ceiling I could see, just a quiet, dreamlike space. I didn't feel panic. I felt still. Then I noticed it. Just to my left, a doorway. There was no door, just an open frame. On my side, everything was grey. But on the other side of that doorway, pure, radiant white, not harsh or blinding, gentle, alive. And then I saw him. Someone stood just beyond the threshold, leaning casually on the doorframe, like he'd been waiting for me. Calm, steady, familiar. He looked directly at me and asked a single question. "Do you want to come home?" It wasn't dramatic. There was no pressure, no emotional pull. But I knew what he meant. I understood exactly what home was in that moment. I knew what crossing through that doorway would mean. And I knew who I was talking to, even though words barely existed in that space. There was no sense of obligation, just clarity. A deep, soul-level knowing that this question had to be answered. It wasn't rhetorical. You couldn't ignore it. You had to choose. So I stood there, leaning on the doorframe, just like him. We talked, not with mouths, but in a way beyond words. I spoke about everything that had happened since 2007, the moment my life first cracked open, the work, the healing, the mess, the mission, the books, the coaching, the people I'd tried to help. The ways I had tried, really tried, to become someone new, someone better, someone who gave more than he took. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a conversation, honest, real, sacred. I didn't know yet what would come next. But I knew one thing. I wasn't the same man who had crashed into that hospital days earlier. Something was shifting. Something was waiting. And the decision was mine. After that first conversation at the doorway, after I told him, "I'm not done yet," he simply said, "Okay." No drama, no emotion, just a clear acknowledgement of my choice. I believe that's the moment they brought me back. My heart restarted. My body, by some miracle, held on. I don't know how long I was technically gone, how long the flatline lasted. But I know that first conversation was real. It was the pivot point. And then I was back at the door, still in a coma here on Earth. But in that other space, that sacred threshold, I returned. It felt like the very next day. People always ask me, how did you know it was the next day? And I don't have a logical answer. I just knew. That's how time works there. It's not measured in minutes or hours, but in knowing. The setting was the same, that hazy grey space, the open doorway, the brilliant light on the other side. But this time there was no more question about whether I'd stay or go. That was settled. This time the question was different. He asked, "So, you're staying. What are you going to do?" And just like that, we were in a new kind of conversation. We talked about the work I'd been doing since turning my life around, about the books I'd written, the people I'd coached, the lives I'd tried to help transform. I shared how my mission had become clear over the years, to help people discover who they really are, not who the world says they are, not who they pretend to be, but who they were divinely created to become. My work had been centered around identity, true identity, guiding people back to their divine origin, their creative power, their inner truth, helping them realize they are not broken or mediocre, but powerful, unique, and worthy of a meaningful life. And I knew in that moment that I hadn't even scratched the surface of what I could do. Then something extraordinary happened. The conversation paused, and suddenly I was no longer at the doorway. I was moving. Not walking or floating, I was being swept through space, like being launched across the universe in a flash of light and power. It was like nothing I can describe. It was fast, endless, and breathtaking. I saw wonders, colors, lights, forms of existence I can't put into words. I felt an overwhelming presence of intelligence, love, power, and creation. It wasn't chaotic, it was sacred. It felt like I was being shown the architecture of the universe, and I had the overwhelming sense that, had I not been shielded in some spiritual cocoon, the sheer energy of what I was witnessing would have burned me to dust. And then I was back at the door, stunned, breathless, changed. And in that moment, 4 truths landed in me, like lightning etched into my soul. First, I knew with total certainty. Each of us is a divine, intentional creation. There are no accidents. You're not random. I'm not random. We are all made on purpose, with purpose. Second, we each have a mission, a calling we chose, and were excited about before we ever arrived here. We didn't stumble into this life. We signed up for it with joy. Third, we were born with everything we need, the gifts, the talents, the inner compass, to fulfill that mission and enjoy the journey. And fourth, we are never alone. Help is always available, from this side of the veil and the other. We are surrounded by support we can't always see, but it is always present. I stood there, holding those 4 truths like sacred fire in my hands, and I asked him, then why do we settle? Why do we live small? Why do we accept crumbs when we were made for so much more? And without hesitation, he gave me the answer. 4 words. Because you don't believe. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't condemnation. It was just the truth. We live below our potential, not because we're not capable, not because we're not worthy, but because we don't believe we are. That hit me hard. I turned inward, reflecting. And then I asked, so what can I do about that? What can I do to help people believe again? He smiled. Glad you asked. And then he gave me a framework, a process, a clear, powerful path for helping people shift those beliefs, step out of fear, and step into the truth of who they are. It wasn't vague or poetic. It was practical, real, actionable. That second conversation was long, rich, and full of purpose. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. It left me with a deep conviction that my work going forward had to be bolder, clearer, and more grounded in the divine truth I'd been shown. This wasn't just about self-help. This was about soul remembrance. And that was just the beginning. On the third day, I returned to the door. But this time, everything felt different. I wasn't confused. I wasn't uncertain. I was energized, charged. It was like something inside me was on fire, in the best way possible. I showed up at that doorway, almost bouncing with anticipation. My mind had been spinning with everything I had seen, everything I had learned, especially the framework I'd been given, which would eventually become the foundation for the book of context. It felt like I'd been handed a sacred blueprint, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I knew I was being prepared for something much bigger than myself. And then he asked me one final question. Just 4 words. Are you sure? At first, it caught me off guard. I remember thinking, wait, did I miss something? Why is he asking me this now? Did I bite off more than I can handle? My mind started racing with doubt. I felt like a student being asked to double-check their answer on the final test. So, we talked. I brought up every possible angle, every what-if, every lingering concern I hadn't even realized I had. And with each question, clarity came. Until finally I took a breath and said, yeah, I'm sure. He looked at me, gave the slightest nod, and just like that, it was done. There were no more words, no grand farewell, just a sense of quiet finality. I knew that chapter had closed. 14 days later, I woke up from the coma. And the moment I opened my eyes, I couldn't stop talking about the framework, the mission, the clarity. It was like my soul had been rewired. I didn't come back wondering what I should do. I came back knowing I had a purpose, and it was time to get to work. I didn't waste time trying to make predictions or write cosmic prophecies. That was never the point. What I focused on, what I still focus on, is helping people reconnect with who they truly are. I was given tools, principles, and a calling, and I intend to use every bit of it. But one of the most powerful changes since that experience, I lost all fear, completely. I say this often, but it still surprises people. I speak at conferences, on podcasts, to audiences around the world. And someone always asks, what's the biggest change since it happened? And the first time I was asked that, just a few months after leaving the hospital, still barely able to walk, I stood on a stage, took a breath, and my mouth said the truth before my brain could even process it. I no longer experience fear. And that changed everything. When someone asked me, not long after I came out of the coma, "What do you mean you don't feel fear anymore?" I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to be honest, clear. I looked at him and said, "What exactly is left for me to fear? I've already died. I know what's on the other side. I'm here by choice. I've got a purpose, and fear just doesn't live in me anymore." That moment wasn't just about a feeling. It was a realization that went deeper than emotion. It was a shift in how I saw the world, myself, and life itself. When fear disappeared, it left a vacuum that filled with clarity, joy, and unwavering purpose. Every day became meaningful. Not perfect, not always easy, but full. Even when things didn't go the way I wanted, I didn't spiral or get stuck. I'd simply ask, okay, what can I do now with what is? That change, living without fear, altered everything. I don't worry about opinions. I don't lose sleep over outcomes. I show up every day to do the work I was called to do. That's it. And the truth is, I believe every one of us is called to something, not in a vague, mystical way, but in a real, practical, sacred sense. You have something inside you that's not random. You're not here by accident. Neither am I. People ask, does God test us? I don't think God walks around trying to make our lives hard. I don't believe he's up there picking out bricks to drop on us just for the fun of it. What I do believe, what I know, is that we are lovingly and intentionally created. And growth, real growth, it only happens through resistance. Think about it. You don't build muscle without weight. You don't grow stronger without effort. Spiritual growth works the same way. The world is designed to give us resistance through circumstances, through pain, through choices, not as punishment, but as opportunity. Bad things happen. People make harmful choices. Life throws curveballs. But the point isn't that these things shouldn't happen. The point is how we respond, what we choose to do in the middle of it. You want to know if we have free will? Absolutely. I used my agency for years in all the wrong ways. I became a person I wasn't proud of. A liar, an addict, someone who caused pain. No one forced me into that. Those were my choices. But grace showed up anyway. Not as judgment, but as an invitation. The moment I heard, "It is enough," it didn't come as a shout, but it thundered through me like nothing else ever had. I woke up knowing I didn't have a clue how to fix my life, but I was going. I was done with who I had been. I didn't need to have all the answers. I just needed to say yes. And I did. That's the same invitation each of us receives over and over again. We don't have to earn it. We just have to choose it. Now, I'm often asked about the state of the world. People bring up end-time prophecies, scriptures, natural disasters, wars, the chaos we see all around. And look, I'm not here to set dates or quote timelines. But if you've read the texts, Judeo-Christian or otherwise, you'll know they describe signs. And yeah, it sure looks like a lot of those signs are happening now. You don't need to be a theologian to see that things are accelerating. The severity, the frequency, it's real. Do I think we're in the final act? Honestly, yeah. It feels like we're approaching something big, something transformational. But again, it doesn't matter when or how. What matters is who you are in the middle of it. You can't control the storms, but you can control how you show up in them. You can't stop every injustice, but you can be just. You may not be able to save the whole world, but you can love deeply, serve powerfully, and live with purpose. And those choices? Those are what you carry with you when this life ends. The details of the world's chaos won't follow you home, but the person you became in the middle of it will. So no, I don't care much about predictions anymore. I care about agency. I care about character. I care about what you do with the time you have. And here's what I've learned. No matter where you were born, how hard your past was, or what you're facing now, you still have the power to choose. You still get to decide how you respond, how you love, how you lead, how you live. That's where your power is. I've lived through addiction, heartbreak, loss, near death, and spiritual awakening. I've lost everything and had to start from scratch more than once. But today, I walk without fear. I speak with conviction. And I show up with the unwavering belief that we are here for a reason. You're here for a reason. You're not too far gone. You're not too broken. You're not too late. Every breath you take is proof that your mission is still in motion. So the only question that really matters now is the one I was asked at that doorway. Are you sure? And if you are, if you're ready to say yes, then get moving. There's work to do, there's light to spread, and there's a world waiting for the real you to rise. We all come into this world empty-handed. And when our time here ends, we leave the same way. No possessions, no titles, no bank account balance. None of it follows us. The only thing we truly carry with us when we go is who we've become. Not what we've owned, but who we've chosen to be. How we've loved, how we've served, how we've grown. That's what matters. That's the legacy we take home. I've lived both sides. I've been the man driven by ego, by fear, by self-destruction. I've also been the man who chose love, forgiveness, and purpose. And I can tell you from experience, we become different people the moment we choose differently. That's the real transformation. Not forced by anyone. Chosen. And that choice is always available. When I finally do go home, for good this time, I want to be at peace with what I've created from my life. Not the external stuff, but the internal. I want to stand there and say, this is who I became. This is what I did with my time. And that's the heart of it. You always have a choice. It's not just a motivational phrase. It's a divine law, a truth that runs through everything. You are never stuck. You are never too far gone. And this life is your canvas. If you've been listening and thinking, well, that's him, not me. That kind of transformation isn't for people like me. Let me stop you right there. And now, if you're still watching this, I want you to know something simple but powerful. You're not here by accident. It's no coincidence that you're watching this video. It's no coincidence you're hearing my story. I died. I stood at the edge between life and death, and I was given the chance to come back, not to live the same life, but to live a true one, to pass on what I learned, to wake up souls that are tired, doubting and thinking, maybe this is all there is for me. Number, I'm here to tell you, you are so much more than you think. I used to be an addict, a failure, completely lost. And now I'm a man with a mission, not because I'm special, but because I chose, and you can choose too. You don't have to die to change. You just have to decide. And if something is stirring in your heart right now, don't ignore it. Drop a comment below, share your thoughts, your questions, or just say, I'm ready. Hit like if something in this video spoke to you. Share this video with someone you love. You never know, this could be the message that saves them. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the messages I share. Messages I believe God placed in my heart for people like you. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a pastor. I'm just a man who got a second chance. And I'm using it to wake up souls that have fallen asleep. If you're hearing this right now, maybe you're one of them. Maybe today is the day you stop, take a breath and say, I'm ready. I choose to live a life that matters. Let me walk with you. Let the light I saw help guide your path. And let this truth take root in your heart. You were created for a reason. You are loved, and you have the power to change everything. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And if you open your heart, I believe God will reach you in ways you never imagined. I'll see you in the next video. And remember, you have the power to choose. You have a purpose, and you are never alone.